I am not saying I am some mountain man or anything like that, but I am comfortable in the woods, especially on land my family has owned since before I was born. That is what bothers me the most. This did not happen in some place I had never been. It happened on ground where I knew every logging trail, every creek crossing, every old fence post, and every stand of cedars thick enough to hide in. The land is in southern Missouri, not too far from Salem. My dad always just called it the 80, even though after my grandfather bought the back strip from a neighbor years ago, it was closer to 110 acres. It is not a giant ranch or anything. It is a mixed-up Ozarks property with hardwood ridges, cedar pockets, a dry creek that only runs after heavy rain, and one old shed on the south side that nobody used anymore. My grandpa used to keep feed in that shed back when he still had cattle. By the time this happened, the roof sagged, the door hung crooked, and the inside smelled like mice, old hay, and gasoline from cans that had been empty for 20 years. Nobody had a reason to go in there, so nobody really did. Every deer season, my dad and I would hunt the same general spots. He liked the North Ridge because he was getting older, and it was easier for him to get in there from the upper gate. I liked the creek bottom because there was a narrow place where deer crossed between two cedar thickets, and if you sat still long enough, you could almost always see something. My ladder stand was chained to a white oak about 30 yards off the creek. It was not fancy, just one of those two-man stands with a small shooting rail and a torn cushion I kept meaning to replace. I had trimmed shooting lanes around it in late summer and hung a cheap trail camera facing the creek crossing. The week before rifle season, I went out to check the camera and top off the corn at another spot. I know people get weird about baiting depending on where they are from, but where we were, people put out corn and mineral blocks on private land all the time. I am not here to argue ethics. That is just what everybody around us did. When I checked that camera, I remember thinking the strap looked twisted. Not cut, not broken, just turned in a way I had not left it. The camera was still on the tree, still locked, and it had normal pictures on it. Does. A small 8-point raccoons, a coyote, me walking past it twice. Nothing weird. I told myself the wind or a coon had messed with it. That sounds stupid now, but at the time there was no reason to make more of it. Opening morning I got there early. I think I pulled up to the gate around 5:15. It was cold enough that my breath showed in the beam of my headlamp, but not bitter cold. I had coffee in a thermos, a rifle in a soft case, and one of those cheap orange vests I kept in the back seat because my good one was still at home from washing it. My dad was already parked at the upper gate when I drove past the gravel road turnoff, so I knew he was on the property. We usually did not hunt together in the same spot. We would text if one of us shot, then meet back at the trucks around 10 or 11. It had been that way for years. I parked at the lower gate, unlocked the chain, drove through, locked it behind me, and parked behind a little rise where the truck could not be seen from the road. That was habit. Not because we were hiding anything, but because people will stop and mess with your truck if they see it sitting by itself during deer season. I put on my vest, loaded my rifle only after I was past the truck, and walked in with my headlamp pointed at the ground. I remember hearing an owl once, then hearing cattle lowing somewhere off the neighboring place, and then the rest was just my boots and leaves. I got into my stand before first light. I clipped my harness in, settled my rifle across my lap, and sat there doing what everyone does in the dark, which is mostly trying not to move and wondering why you woke up that early on purpose. When the woods started to turn gray, I could see the creek bed below me. It was mostly dry, with patches of leaves caught against exposed roots. The cedar thicket on the opposite side looked black at first, then green, then normal. Around 7, 2 does crossed from left to right. I watched them for a while, but they were small and I was not in a hurry. A few minutes later, I heard one shot way off to the west, probably across the highway. Then it got quiet again. I saw the man maybe 20 minutes after that. At first, I only caught orange through the cedars. I thought it was my dad, which annoyed me because he knew where I was sitting, and there was no reason for him to be pushing deer through my spot. Then I realized the person was too tall and too thin to be my dad. My dad is built like an old lineman, even now. This person was narrow in the shoulders, wearing a blaze orange vest over a dark hoodie, with faded jeans tucked into rubber boots. He was standing at the edge of the cedar thicket across the creek, maybe 70 or 80 yards away, facing my stand. That was the first thing that bothered me. He was not walking through. He was not glassing the hillside. He was not looking down at tracks. He was just standing there facing me. I lifted one hand, slow and obvious, the way you do when you do not want to look like an idiot, but you also want to say, "Hey, I see you." He did not wave back. He did not raise binoculars. He did not act like he was embarrassed to be caught trespassing. He stood there long enough that I started thinking maybe he did not know I was in the stand. That did not make sense because I had orange on. I was not hidden, and the stand was not tucked away. Then he turned and walked back into the cedars. I almost yelled, but I did not. People get touchy during deer season, and I did not want to start a screaming match with a stranger holding a rifle. I watched the place where he disappeared for a few minutes. I never saw a gun in his hands, which somehow made it worse. Most hunters carry a rifle in a way you can read from a distance, over the shoulder, across the chest, cradled in one arm. This guy's hands had been down at his sides, empty as far as I could tell. I texted my dad. "There's somebody down by my stand. Orange vest. You know anybody coming in from south?" The message said delivered, but he did not answer right away. That was normal. Reception was bad on the North Ridge, and my dad always kept his phone buried in a pocket because he said screens moving in the dark spooked deer. I sat there trying to settle back down. I kept telling myself it was probably one of the Shelton boys from the neighboring property. They had permission on their side, but they were sloppy with fence lines. We had run into them before. They were not dangerous, just irritating. About 10 minutes later, I saw him again. This time he was not across the creek. He was on my side, farther to my right, standing near an old deadfall where I had trimmed a lane back in August. He was closer now, maybe 40 yards. Close enough that I could see he had a short beard, or at least dark stubble, and something light-colored pulled low on his head under an orange cap. He was looking at the ground when I first saw him. Then his head came up and he looked right at me. I said, not yelling but loud enough, "You lost?" He did not answer. I said, "This is private land." Still nothing. I did not point my rifle at him. I want to be clear about that. I had it across my lap with the barrel angled away. I was angry, but I was not trying to be stupid. He looked at me for a few seconds, then turned and walked behind the deadfall. Not fast, not running, just walking, like I was the one interrupting him. That was when I noticed his vest looked old. Not dirty like he had brushed against a tree, but old like it had been left outside. It was dull and wrinkled, with a dark stain near one pocket. His jeans were wet up to the knees. He moved through the brush without making much noise, which is hard to do in November leaves unless you are paying attention to every step. I texted my dad again. "He's on my side now, I'm not joking. Call me." Then I watched the woods around me and felt that old confidence I had about the property start slipping. It is a strange thing when a place you know suddenly feels unfamiliar. The creek bed looked the same. The stand felt the same under my boots. I could see the same crooked hickory and the same cedar with the split trunk, but the land did not feel like mine anymore. It felt like I had walked into someone else's situation without knowing it. My dad called maybe 5 minutes later. I answered on the first vibration and kept my voice low. "What's going on?" he asked. "There's a guy down here," I said. "Orange vest. He was across the creek. Now he's on my side. Won't talk." "Shelton? I don't know, doesn't look like them. Is he armed?" "I don't see a gun." There was a pause. I could hear wind hitting my dad's phone. "You want me to come down?" he asked. I looked around while he said it. I did not see the man, but I had that feeling that he had not left. I hate saying that because it sounds dramatic, but that is exactly what it was. I felt watched from more than one direction, not by the woods, by a person. "Yeah," I said. "Come down the logging road, don't cut through." "Stay in the stand," he said. "Don't go after him." "I'm not." "Keep your rifle where you can get it." That was not the sort of thing my dad said unless he was worried. I stayed put. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Then I heard a sound behind me, uphill toward the way I had come in. It was not a branch snapping. It was metal touching metal. A soft clink, then another. I turned as slowly as I could in the stand and looked through the trees toward the old logging trail. I could not see the trail itself from where I sat, but I could see pieces of it through gaps. There was no orange, no movement, just bare trees. Then my phone buzzed again. It was my dad. "I'm at your truck. Did you leave door open?" I stared at that message for a second and did not understand it. Then I called him. "What do you mean?" I whispered. "Your passenger door is cracked open." "I locked it." "You sure?" "Yes, I'm sure." "You got anything missing?" "I don't know, I'm in the stand." My dad did not answer right away. Then he said, "I'm coming to you." "Dad, wait." I'm already walking. I could hear him breathing, and I could hear leaves under his boots through the phone. I told him to keep talking, partly so I knew where he was, and partly because I did not want to sit there alone with the phone silent. He said he was coming down the logging road, staying in the open where he could. He said my truck did not look damaged, but the glove box was open and the papers from the console were on the seat. That made no sense because I had locked the truck. I knew I had. The keys were in my front pocket. The only extra key was in my house, unless my dad still had the old spare on his keyring, which he did not use. While he was talking, I saw the man again. He was downhill now, beyond the creek, walking left to right through the cedars. He was farther away than before, but he was moving in the same direction my dad would eventually come from if he cut down toward me. I stood up in the stand without thinking. "I see him," I said. "Where?" "Across the creek, moving west." "Is he coming toward me?" "I don't know. Stay on the road." The man stopped then. I do not know if he heard me or saw me stand, but he stopped and turned his head toward my stand. He did not look rushed. He did not look afraid of being caught. He raised one hand, and for a second I thought he was finally going to wave. Instead, he put one finger to his lips. That was the moment everything changed for me. Before that, I could still file it under trespasser, weird neighbor, poacher, somebody drunk or high or confused. But when he did that, when he looked at me from across the creek and told me to be quiet, I understood he knew exactly what he was doing. I told my dad, "Stop walking." "What?" "Stop walking right now." My dad heard something in my voice because he stopped arguing. The man backed into the cedars and disappeared again. I do not remember exactly how long it took my dad to reach me. It was probably only 10 minutes, but it felt longer. He came down the logging trail with his rifle in both hands, not raised, just ready. I stayed in the stand until I saw him. Then I climbed down faster than I should have and nearly slipped on the last rung. My dad looked mad in the way he gets when he is actually scared. He asked where the man went. I pointed across the creek. We did not chase him. I know some people reading this will say they would have gone after him, but I do not believe most of them. Not if they were actually standing there with their father, knowing a stranger had been circling them, messing with a locked truck, and moving through woods he seemed to know too well. My dad and I walked back to my truck together, watching both sides of the trail the entire way. The passenger door was shut when we got there. That made my dad stop dead. "I left it open," he said. The glove box was closed too, not latched all the way, but pushed up. Papers were still on the passenger seat. My registration, insurance card, old receipts, a tire pressure gauge, and a charging cord. Nothing valuable had been taken because there was not much valuable in there. My dad walked around the truck once, then twice. There were muddy boot prints by the passenger side. Not mine, not his. Bigger than mine, with a deep heel and a wide tread. I unlocked the driver door with shaking hands and checked inside. My wallet was not there because I had it in my jacket. My spare ammo was still behind the seat. My cheap binoculars were still in the center console. The only thing I noticed missing at first was a laminated property map I kept folded in the glove box. It had stand locations marked on it, plus the property lines in the creek. My dad noticed the second thing. "Where's your camera card case?" he asked. I kept a little plastic case in the console with extra SD cards for trail cameras. It was gone. That bothered him more than the map. He looked toward the woods, then toward the road, then said, "We're leaving." We drove out in my truck and my dad left his parked at the upper gate until later. On the way out, he called the county sheriff's office. I could tell from his side of the conversation that they were not exactly treating it like an emergency. It was opening weekend. They were probably getting calls about trespassers all morning. My dad kept saying, "No, you're not understanding me." And he got inside a locked truck. And my son was in a stand and this man was circling him. They said they would send a deputy when one was available and told us not to confront anyone. We went to my dad's house, which is only about 15 minutes from the property. My mom was there, and when she saw us back before 9 with no deer and both of us acting strange, she knew something had happened. My dad told her the basics. I remember standing at their kitchen sink, washing my hands even though they were not dirty, and noticing my fingers were trembling. I hated that. I kept flexing them like it would stop. The deputy came around 11:30. He was younger than I expected, maybe late 20s, polite, and clearly busy. He took notes while we explained everything. He asked if we had disputes with neighbors. My dad said no, not serious ones. He asked if any stands had been stolen lately. I said no. He asked if I was sure the truck had been locked. I said yes. He asked if the man had threatened me directly. I told him about the finger to the lips. He wrote it down, but I could tell that was hard to put in a report in a way that sounded as bad as it felt. Then my dad mentioned the trail camera. The deputy perked up a little. "You have cameras down there?" "I've got one by the creek," I said. "Maybe 200 yards from where I saw him." "Could have got him?" "Maybe." My dad looked at me. "We should pull it." The deputy told us he could go with us, but not right that second. He had another call. He said he could meet us at the property in about an hour if we wanted to retrieve the camera and show him the exact area. My dad said yes immediately. My mom did not like that at all. She kept saying, "Why do you need to go back there today?" And my dad kept saying, "Because if he's there, I want the law seeing it, not us guessing about it later." We met the deputy at the lower gate a little after 1. By then the sun was out, and the whole thing felt different in a way that almost made me embarrassed. That is another part I remember clearly. In daylight, with a deputy standing there and trucks on the gravel road, my own fear started to feel excessive. I found myself wondering if maybe the man had been some trespasser who got spooked and acted weird because he was embarrassed. Maybe my truck door had not latched. Maybe I had misplaced the map in the SD card case. Your mind will do that to you. It will try to make the bad thing smaller because the full-size version is too much to carry around. Then we walked to my truck spot and saw the boot prints still in the mud. The deputy crouched and took pictures with his phone. The prints went from the passenger side of where my truck had been parked toward the tree line, then looped around behind the rise. There were also prints where someone had stood on the slope above the parking spot, in a place where they could watch me get ready that morning without being seen from the truck. That made my stomach turn. I pictured myself putting on my vest, drinking coffee, checking my rifle, not knowing someone was standing up there in the dark watching me. We walked to the stand next. The deputy was careful about where he stepped around the base. He found boot prints there too. They circled the tree. Not just passed by, circled it. Some were right under the ladder. One print was pressed into the soft dirt where a person would stand if they were looking straight up at the seat. I had been in that stand while he was below me at some point. I do not know when. Maybe before daylight. Maybe while I was looking across the creek. Maybe when I heard that metal clink behind me. I only know those prints were not old. The edges were sharp, and the leaves on top had been crushed into the mud. The deputy got quieter after that. We pulled the trail camera from the tree by the creek crossing. It was still locked, still working, but the face of it had been turned slightly toward the ground. I knew I had not left it like that. We took it back to the trucks and plugged the SD card into my dad's laptop with one of those little adapters he kept in his console. The deputy stood by the open tailgate while we clicked through pictures. At first it was normal. Deer, raccoons, a fox. Me checking the camera the previous week. Then 3 nights before opening morning, there he was. It was not a perfect picture. Trail cameras never are. It was black and white, with the flash making his eyes bright and flat. But it was him. Same narrow build, same hoodie, same rubber boots. No orange vest in that picture. He was walking from right to left across the creek bed at 2:13 in the morning, carrying a backpack over one shoulder. The next picture was worse. It was from the same night, maybe 1 minute later. He had stopped and turned toward the camera. His face was partially covered with what looked like a neck gaiter or a piece of cloth. He was holding something in his left hand. At first I thought it was a stick. Then the deputy zoomed in and said, "That's a pry bar." Nobody said anything for a few seconds. There were more pictures. Not every night, but enough. He had been on our land at least 4 times in the previous 2 weeks, sometimes after midnight, sometimes just before dawn. In one picture, he had the orange vest draped over his arm. In another, he was dragging a tarp behind him, the back end bunched up like there was something inside it. The tarp did not look body-sized or anything like that. I want to be careful here because I am not trying to make it more dramatic than it was. It looked more like tools, bags, maybe scrap metal, but seeing him drag anything through that creek at 3 in the morning was bad enough. Then we found a daytime picture from the Thursday before season. It showed him standing close to the camera, face uncovered, looking past it toward my stand. He had a beard, sunken cheeks, and a stare that made me feel like I had interrupted something private. He was not smiling. He was not making a face. He was just looking. The timestamp said 4:48 in the afternoon. My dad said, "He's been watching the stand." The deputy asked if we recognized him. I did not. My dad leaned closer to the laptop, then shook his head. "Maybe," he said. "I don't know." We gave the SD card to the deputy. He asked for the camera too, so we handed it over. Then my dad said something about the old shed on the south side. He said if someone had been coming in that much, the shed was the only structure on the property where he could get out of the weather. I did not like the idea as soon as he said it. I liked it even less when the deputy asked where it was and whether there was vehicle access. There was, sort of. An old farm lane came in from a different gravel road and ended near the south fence. We kept that gate chained, but it was old, and the fence near it had been pushed down by cattle years ago. A person could get through if they knew where to go. The deputy told us to stay by the trucks while he drove around to check the south entrance. My dad said he was going with him because it was his land, and the deputy did not know the roads. The deputy hesitated, then agreed as long as we stayed behind him, and did exactly what he said. I rode with my dad. I did not want to, but I also did not want him going without me. We drove around by county roads to the south side. The gate was still chained, but the grass beside it was flattened. Not just walked on, driven on. Someone had been pulling off the road and going around the gate through a low spot near the fence. There were tire tracks in the mud, narrow ones, maybe from a small truck or SUV. The deputy took more pictures, then we walked in. That walk to the shed is not far, maybe 300 yards, but I remember every step. The trees were thinner on that side, mostly scrub oak and cedar, with old pasture grass grown up between them. There was trash in places from years ago, old cans and broken glass and pieces of feed sacks. The shed sat near the back corner where the ground dipped toward a little drainage. It looked exactly the way it always had, which somehow made it worse. Same gray boards, same tin roof, same crooked door. The deputy stopped us about 50 yards out and told us to wait. He drew his pistol but kept it pointed down. My dad's jaw tightened when he saw that. It was one thing to talk about a trespasser. It was another thing to watch a deputy approach your old shed with his hand on a gun. He called out, "Sheriff's office, anybody inside?" No answer. He called again. Still nothing. He moved to the door, pushed it open with his left hand, and stepped back. I could not see inside from where I stood. I could smell it, though. Not the old hay and mice smell I remembered. Smoke. Body odor. Trash. Something sour like spoiled food. The deputy looked inside for maybe 2 seconds, then backed away and got on his radio. That was when I knew this was bigger than a weird hunter. He told us to stay back. My dad asked what he saw. The deputy said, "Somebody's been staying here." Then he said more units were coming. We waited by the fence line. My dad paced in a short line and kept looking toward the cedars. I stood by his truck and felt useless. Every few minutes I would replay the morning in my head and find some new detail that seemed worse than before. The man seeing me arrive, the man circling my stand, the man going through my truck, the man raising one finger to his lips, the man knowing our land well enough to disappear. 2 more deputies arrived, then a conservation agent. They went through the shed while we stayed back. After a while, one deputy came over and asked my dad when the shed had last been used. My dad said not in years. The deputy asked if we had given anyone permission to stay there. No. He asked if we stored tools there. No. He asked if any family members were having trouble. Anyone homeless. Anyone on drugs. Anyone who might use the shed without telling us. My dad said no to all of it, and I could tell he was offended, but he answered. Later, after they were done collecting what they needed, the deputy told us some of what they found. A sleeping bag, a propane camp stove, food wrappers, several license plates, a bolt cutter, my property map, my SD card case, mail with other people's names on it, a stack of folded orange vests and hats, a cheap handheld radio, and a small notebook with vehicle descriptions, dates, and times. My truck was in that notebook. So was my dad's. There were other trucks listed too. Some we recognized as neighbors, some we did not. Next to a few of them were notes like Sad AM, Old Man North Gate, Sun Creek, and Blue Ford leaves 10. The deputy would not let us handle the notebook, but he read enough out loud that my dad and I looked at each other and both understood the same thing. This man had not just wandered onto our land. He had been watching patterns. He knew who came in, where they parked, and when they usually left. The conservation agent asked if any deer had been found dumped on the property. My dad said sometimes people left carcasses near the south fence, but that had been going on forever. The agent nodded, but did not explain why he asked. Another deputy came over holding an evidence bag with a wallet inside. Not mine, not my dad's. The name on the license was not anyone we knew. They did not find the man in the shed. That part almost made it worse. I had pictured him hiding inside, getting arrested, everything ending right there. Instead, the shed proved he was real and dangerous, but he was still somewhere else. Maybe in the woods. Maybe watching from another ridge. Maybe already miles away. The deputies told us not to hunt the property until they figured out who he was. They said they would increase patrols and contact neighboring landowners. My dad asked whether they were going to sit on the shed in case he came back. They said they would check it, but they had to be realistic about manpower. That is when my dad got angry. Not yelling, but close. He said, "He was under my son's deer stand this morning." The deputy said he understood. My dad said, "No, you don't." The deputy did not argue. That evening, after we got back to my parents' house, we locked everything. Doors, garage, shed, even the truck caps. My mom made chili because she did not know what else to do, and none of us ate much. I stayed there instead of going back to my place. My dad and I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad, writing down anything missing from the land or the trucks. The more we thought about it, the more small things came back. A hatchet from the truck bed, a roll of paracord, an old pair of binoculars, a pack of batteries, things you might lose or forget about unless you realize somebody had been gathering supplies from you one piece at a time. Around 8:30 that night, my dad's neighbor, Mark, called. He lived about a mile from the north gate. My dad put him on speaker. Mark said a deputy had stopped by asking about trespassers and showed him a trail camera picture. Mark recognized the guy, not by name, but he had seen him walking along the road twice in the last month, once near an abandoned trailer on a property that had been tied up in probate for years. Mark said he assumed the guy was a relative of the owner, or someone hired to clean it out. My dad called the deputy and passed that along. The next morning, Sunday, they found the vehicle. It was an old dark green Ford Explorer, parked behind that abandoned trailer, hidden from the road by cedar trees and a collapsed lean-to. The plates on it did not match the vehicle. One plate was from a truck reported stolen in Dent County. The Explorer itself had been reported missing out of Phelps County months earlier, but it had changed hands or been used by different people because nobody seemed to know exactly who had it last. They did not find the man there either. What they did find was more stolen property. Tools, hunting gear, 2 rifles that had been reported stolen from a cabin break-in, a compound bow, coolers, wallets, phones, trail cameras, a plastic tote full of mail. The orange vest I had seen him wearing was not there, but there were others. The deputies started treating it like a burglary ring at first, like maybe several people were involved. That was what they told my dad anyway. I spent that Sunday feeling like the whole county had shifted under me. Every truck that slowed down near my parents' house made me look out the window. Every dog bark from down the road made my mom freeze. My dad tried to act normal and failed. He cleaned rifles that were already clean. He checked locks he had already checked. He drove to the end of the driveway 3 different times for no reason. That afternoon, the deputy called and asked us to come in to give fuller statements. My dad and I drove to the sheriff's office. They separated us for the statements, not in an unfriendly way, just procedure. I told the story again from the beginning. The deputy asked me to describe the finger-to-lips gesture 3 times, probably because it was the strangest part. I told him exactly what I saw. He asked if the man looked angry. I said no. He asked if he looked confused. I said no. He asked if he looked like he wanted me to be quiet because someone else was nearby. I said I did not think so. It felt like a warning, or a game. I could not explain it better than that. Before we left, they showed me a photo lineup. I picked him out immediately. His name was Travis Bell. I will use that name because it was in the local paper later, and he was convicted. So I am not guessing or accusing some random person. He was 38. He had warrants in 2 counties, mostly burglary and theft, but there was also an assault charge from a fight outside a gas station, where he hit a man with a tire iron. He had skipped court, disappeared, and apparently spent at least part of the fall moving between abandoned properties, hunting cabins, and sheds. He stole from trucks and camps when hunters were away from them. He also seemed to study people first. That last part is what kept getting to me. Theft is bad, but I can understand the basic shape of it. A thief sees a truck, breaks in, grabs what he can, leaves. This was not that. He watched. He made notes. He knew I was the Sun Creek. He knew my dad was the old man North Gate. He knew enough to go through my truck while I was in the woods. And when I saw him, he did not run. He moved around me. They caught him Monday morning, and not on our property, not at the trailer. A farmer south of town called in a suspicious person walking along a fence line behind his barn before sunrise. The man was wearing an orange vest over a dark hoodie and carrying a backpack. By the time deputies got there, he had cut through a brushy draw and made it to an old county road. A conservation agent spotted him near a low-water crossing. Travis ran, slipped in the creek, and tried to climb the far bank. He did not have a gun on him when they caught him, but he had a hunting knife, a pry bar, a screwdriver, my laminated property map folded in his pocket, even though they had already found 1 copy in the shed, and 3 SD cards that were not mine. When my dad called to tell me, I had to sit down. I expected to feel relief right away. I did, eventually, but first I felt sick. He had still been carrying my map. That meant he had either taken 2 copies from my truck somehow, or he had gone back to the shed after deputies searched it, or the one in the shed was not mine, and he had maps from more than 1 property. I never got a clear answer on that. Maybe evidence got mixed up in the telling. Maybe he really did have more than 1. All I know is the deputy said they found my marked map on him when he was arrested, and that fact has stayed with me more than almost anything. The story made a small article in the county paper. It did not sound like much. Man arrested in connection with multiple burglaries. There was a mugshot, a list of charges, and a sentence about stolen hunting equipment recovered from several locations. Nothing in that article captured what it felt like to sit in a tree stand and realize the man below you had been watching you for weeks. Nothing about the truck door. Nothing about the boot prints circling the ladder. Nothing about him putting his finger to his lips across the creek. A few weeks later, one of the deputies called my dad and said they had connected Travis to at least 7 property thefts and 2 cabin break-ins. There was also a hunter from another county who reported being followed out of public land by a man in orange earlier that same season. But he had not gotten a good look at him, so nothing came of it. The wallet they found in our shed belonged to a man whose truck had been broken into at a conservation area. The tarp from the trail camera picture was never found, but they believed he had been using it to drag stolen items through the woods without carrying them in his arms. The old shed was cleaned out after the deputies released it. My dad, my uncle, and I went down there with gloves, contractor bags, and a kind of anger that had nowhere to go. I hated being inside that building. There were scrape marks on the floor where something heavy had been dragged. There was a burned spot in the dirt behind it with half-melted plastic and bits of paper. In one corner, someone had scratched tally marks into the wood. Maybe they were already there from decades ago. Maybe they were his. I do not know. We tore the door off, hauled out every piece of trash, and my dad burned what he was legally allowed to burn in a barrel. The next month, he had the whole shed pushed over and hauled away. I wish I could say everything went back to normal after that. In the practical sense, it did. Travis went to jail. Some stolen property was returned. My dad put up new gates and better cameras. He added cellular cameras that send pictures straight to his phone. He posted the property more heavily. He and Mark cleared the south fence line so nobody could drive around that gate without being seen. Life moved on because that is what it does. But I did not hunt the creek stand again. I tried once the next season. I got up early, drove to the lower gate, sat there in the dark with my hand on the keys, and could not make myself unlock the chain. I kept thinking about him standing on the rise above my truck, watching me get ready. I kept thinking about him walking under the stand before daylight, looking up at the empty seat, knowing I would be there soon. I turned around and went home before sunrise. I told my dad I felt sick, which was not exactly a lie. The stand is gone now. My dad and I took it down 2 summers ago. The tree had grown around the chain a little, and we had to cut it loose. The seat cushion was ruined, and wasps had built under the rail. It was just a piece of hunting equipment, but when it came down and hit the leaves, I felt something close. Not healed exactly, just finished. The part that still bothers me most is not that he was a criminal. It is not even that he broke into my truck. It is that he understood our routine before we knew he existed. He knew where my dad parked. He knew where I hunted. He knew that opening morning would put us on opposite ends of the land. He knew enough to wear orange so that if either of us caught a glimpse of him, our first thought would be hunter, not threat. And he knew that if he stood still in the woods, most people would spend the first few minutes explaining him away. That is what I did. I explained him away until he was close enough to put a finger to his mouth and tell me to stay quiet. I do not hunt alone anymore. I still go with my dad sometimes, usually on the North Ridge, or on a friend's farm where there are more people around. I still like being in the woods. I still like cold mornings and coffee from a thermos, and the sound of leaves moving when the sun comes up. I did not lose all of that. I refuse to give him that much. But I do not ignore small things now. A twisted camera strap, a boot print by a gate, a truck door that should not be open, orange moving through cedars where no one should be. People think danger in the woods announces itself. It usually does not. Sometimes it wears the same color you do. Sometimes it stands still and waits for you to decide it belongs there. Okay, so here is my story. I've hunted with my dad since I was old enough to sit still in a blind without asking for snacks every 5 minutes. I'm not saying that to make myself sound tougher than I am. It's just important to understand that I was not new to the woods, or guns, or opening morning nerves, or the weird sounds you hear before sunrise when your brain wants to turn every squirrel into a person. I knew the difference between being uneasy and being in trouble. This happened on leased land in eastern Kentucky, outside of Moorhead, not too far from the edge of Daniel Boone National Forest. The lease was not huge. It was a little under 300 acres of steep ridges, old logging cuts, creek bottoms, an overgrown pasture that had gone back to brush. My dad and I had been on it for 4 seasons by then. We split the lease with 2 other guys from town, but the rule was simple. Everybody had their own stands, and nobody touched another man's setup without asking. We all got along fine because of that. My stand was on the backside of the property, above a creek bed that held water most of the year. It was a metal ladder stand chained to a hickory tree at the edge of a narrow saddle. Deer used that saddle because it was the easiest way to cross from one ridge to the next without dropping all the way into the hollow. I found it the first year we leased the place, and after I killed a decent 8-point there my second season, I never moved it. I trimmed it every August, checked the straps every September, and hunted it like it was part of the land. My dad hunted about 400 yards away from me on a bench above the same creek. He was 58 at the time and still in good shape, but his knees were bad from 30 years of concrete work. He liked spots he could reach without climbing too much. He had a ground blind tucked into a patch of young pines where the bench flattened out. From my stand, you could not see his blind because of the ridge between us, but we were close enough that if either of us fired, the other would hear it clearly. The property had one main gate off a gravel road. From there, an old logging road ran in a crooked loop through the middle before fading into ruts and deer trails. We usually parked together near the gate, walked in the first half mile, then split off. Dad would cut left to his blind, and I would keep going down to the creek and climb to my stand from below. We did it that way every opening morning. The year this happened, opening day of modern gun season fell on a Saturday. I remember that because I had worked late Friday and almost told my dad I would meet him later in the morning. He would not have said anything, but I knew he looked forward to opening day more than Christmas. So I got 3 hours of sleep, drove to his house at 4 in the morning, and followed him out to the lease with coffee in the cup holder and my rifle case in the back seat. It was cold, but not freezing. The kind of damp Kentucky cold that gets into your sleeves and stays there. The sky was clear, and there was enough moonlight to see the shape of the ridges above the road. There was also a low fog sitting in the bottom ground, not thick enough to hide the trail, but enough to make everything beyond 50 yards look soft and gray. Dad was already out of his truck when I pulled in behind him at the gate. He had his orange vest on over his camo jacket, and he was holding a thermos in one hand, looking down the road into the property. I remember asking him what he was looking at. He said he thought he saw taillights farther in, but they were gone by the time I got out. That should have mattered more to us. It did not. People shined lights from the road sometimes. Hunters on neighboring properties drove around before daylight. Poachers existed, but most of what we dealt with on that lease was normal country nonsense. Teenagers riding side by sides where they should not. Someone dumping a washer near the creek crossing. A couple raccoon hunters who got turned around one night and apologized the next day. We had never had a reason to believe someone dangerous was back there. Dad unlocked the gate and swung it open. I drove through first, then he came in behind me, locked it again, and we parked in the pull-off we always used. His truck was a white F-150, mine was a silver Tacoma. We kept them nose out because the spot was tight and muddy if it rained. That morning, the ground was wet enough to hold tracks, but not slick. I remember seeing tire marks in the mud and thinking they were ours from the weekend before. We got our rifles out and loaded only after we were away from the trucks. That was Dad's rule. No loaded rifles near vehicles. He had a lot of those rules, and most of them were annoying when I was younger, but I follow all of them now. We walked in without headlamps for the first stretch because the moon was bright. About halfway down the logging road, Dad tapped my shoulder and pointed to the left, where he split off toward his blind. That was usually where he would say good luck, or tell me not to shoot a baby, something like that. That morning, he just gave me a small nod and went into the trees. I kept walking. The woods were quiet in the way they are before a busy hunting day. Not silent exactly. There was wind in the higher branches and dry leaves moving against each other, but no birds yet, no far-off shots, no trucks on the road. I reached the creek bottom around 5:30. It was still dark enough that I used my headlamp for the last part, mostly to make sure I did not step into a hole or onto a slick rock. The water was low, so I crossed where I always crossed, using the same 2 flat stones. Then I started up the other side toward my stand. I knew something was wrong before I saw it. I could feel it in that stupid practical way where your body notices the missing shape before your brain catches up. My stand was supposed to be on the hickory at the top of the little rise, angled toward the saddle. Even in the dark, I should have been able to see the ladder's outline against the gray sky. I got within 20 yards and stopped because the tree was empty. At first, I thought I had come up the wrong side. That sounds impossible, but in the dark, with a headlamp flattening everything out, it happens. I turned in a slow circle and checked the landmarks. Big forked white oak to the right, old stump shaped like a chair to the left, rock outcrop behind me. Same place, same hickory, no stand. I walked up to the tree and put my hand where the chain had been. The bark was scarred where the metal had rubbed for years. There were fresh marks too, bright cuts in the bark where something had scraped it recently. On the ground were 2 small flakes of rust and a broken zip tie. My chain was gone. The stand was gone. I stood there for probably a full minute, just breathing through my nose, trying to make the facts line up in a way that did not bother me. I thought maybe one of the other guys moved it because the tree was dying, but the tree was fine. I thought maybe the landowner had taken it down, but he would have called. I thought maybe thieves stole it, but why steal a ladder stand from the back of a property and then leave no drag marks down the trail? Then my headlamp caught metal between the trees. It was not gone. It had been moved. The stand was set up about 70 yards deeper into the woods, on a different tree, at the edge of a small hollow I never hunted because the wind swirled there. Whoever moved it had not just tossed it aside. They had reassembled it. The ladder was strapped to a skinny oak, and the seat was facing away from the saddle, toward a thick patch of mountain laurel and young pines. It looked wrong there, too tall for the tree, too exposed from behind. The shooting rail was crooked. I stood there with my rifle in one hand and my headlamp pointed at it, feeling a kind of anger that had fear underneath it. I texted Dad, "Did you move my stand?" The message took a few seconds, then showed delivered. No answer. I texted again. "Not funny, it's on a different tree." Still nothing. I almost called him, but I did not want to ruin his hunt over what I was still trying to treat like some dumb prank. One of the lease guys, Brent, had a dry sense of humor. He was the only person I could imagine doing something stupid, like moving a stand as a joke, though even that did not really fit him. The stand was heavy and awkward, and moving it 70 yards through brush would have taken 2 people unless someone worked at it for a long time. I walked around the new tree and looked at the ground. There were boot prints everywhere. Some were mine from just then, but others were deeper and older. At least 2 different tread patterns. One had a square heel and wide lugs. The other looked like rubber boots. I found places where the ladder feet had been set down and dragged a few inches. The prints weren't fresh from this morning. They were a day or 2 old, pressed into the dirt before the Friday night rain. I found a shallow groove in the leaves where the stand had probably been carried or pulled. The lock was still attached to the chain. That was the first detail that really scared me. The chain that used to hold the stand to the hickory was wrapped around the new tree. The same padlock was through it. I knew it was mine because it had a strip of orange tape on the side where Dad had marked it. I put my hand on the lock and turned it. It was still locked. I had the only key on my key ring. Dad had the spare. I checked my pocket and felt my keys there. I pulled them out and found the little brass key for that lock. For a few seconds I just stared at it in my palm. Then I tried it on the padlock because my brain needed proof. It opened. Somebody had unlocked it, moved the stand, chained it to another tree, locked it again, and left. That meant somebody either had a copy of my key, had picked the lock, or had taken Dad's spare at some point. None of those options felt good. The sky was starting to lighten, not sunrise yet, but that dull blue-gray before legal shooting hours. I turned off my headlamp and looked back toward the creek. The woods were empty as far as I could see. I looked toward the laurel thicket the stand now faced. That was when I realized the new position gave someone in the thicket a clear view of the ladder. If I climbed into that stand, my back would be to the creek in the old saddle, and anything moving in that laurel could watch me from less than 30 yards away. I should have left right then. Instead, I climbed up. I know how stupid that sounds, but at the time, leaving felt like giving in to something I had not identified yet. I was tired, irritated, and embarrassed by how badly the moved stand had shaken me. I told myself I would sit there until Dad answered, then climb down and deal with it after first light. I checked every strap before putting my weight on the ladder. The stand was not placed well, but it was secure enough. I climbed slow, clipped into my harness, and sat down. The seat cushion was damp, not from dew. It had a different wetness to it, like someone had sat there recently in soaked clothes. I shifted to one side and felt something under the cushion. I lifted it and found a cigarette butt pressed into the mesh seat. Dad does not smoke. I do not smoke. Brent did not smoke, and the other lease guy, Kenny, chewed tobacco but did not smoke either. I put the cigarette butt on the rail and stared at it until I got mad enough to stop shaking. My phone buzzed. It was not Dad. It was Brent in our lease group chat. He wrote, "Anybody already back by the gate? Thought I heard a truck." I kept my phone tucked deep inside my camo jacket, shielding the screen with my hands so the blue glow wouldn't illuminate my face to whatever was sitting in the Laurel. I typed, "My stand got moved. Did you do it?" He answered fast, "What?" I sent a picture of the stand from where I was sitting, aimed down at the wrong tree and the Laurel in front of me. Brent wrote, "I didn't touch your stand." Kenny added a minute later, "Not me." Then Brent wrote, "Where's your dad?" I looked at the top of the screen, still no response from him. By then, legal light was close. Usually opening morning has a feeling to it. You are tired, but wired. Every little sound matters, because a deer could appear at any second. That morning I did not care about deer. I kept looking behind me, then down the ladder, then toward the Laurel. My rifle was across my lap with the safety on. I did not like sitting high up with my back exposed, but I liked the idea of climbing down even less. At 6:50, I heard a shot from far across the valley, then another from the opposite direction. Hunting season had started for everyone else. On our lease, nothing moved. Around 7:10, I saw my truck, not clearly. From that stand's new position, there was one narrow gap through the trees where the logging road was visible far below. I had never noticed it from the ground because I never sat there. Through that gap, I could see a pale piece of my Tacoma when the light hit it. At first, it was just the roof and windshield. Then something dark moved beside it. I leaned forward. A person was walking around the trucks. Not a deer, not a trick of branches. A person. They were small at that distance, just a dark shape moving between my truck and Dad's white F-150. I watched them bend at the passenger side of my truck. Then they walked behind Dad's truck and disappeared from the gap. I called Dad. It rang until voicemail. I called again, voicemail. I texted, "Someone is at the trucks. Answer me." Then, from somewhere behind me and down the hill, I heard my dad's voice. Not close enough to be beside the stand, maybe 80 or 90 yards away. It came from the direction of the creek crossing. It said my name. I turned so fast the stand shifted under me. There is no clean way to describe how I felt in that second. Relief hit first because it was his voice. Then the fear came right behind it because his voice was in the wrong place. He should have been on the bench to my left, nowhere near the creek crossing, unless he had walked straight past his blind and circled around behind me. He also should have answered his phone if he was that close. He called my name again. It sounded like him, but flat. Not emotionless exactly, just too calm for what was happening. I did not answer. I sat there with my rifle held tight against my chest and stared through the trees. I could not see him. The creek bottom was below me, and the Laurel blocked part of the view. My phone was still in my hand. I called him again while I listened. Far off, from somewhere that sounded nothing like the voice below me, I heard a phone ring. It was faint, but I heard it. It rang from down the hollow to my left, near where Dad's blind should have been. The voice behind me had not been Dad holding his phone. I stopped the call before it went to voicemail and held my breath. The woods made little normal noises. Leaves shifting. A branch ticking against another branch. A crow starting up somewhere over the ridge. Then there was a sound below me that I have never forgotten. A soft scrape of a boot sliding on wet leaves, then stopping. Whoever was down there had moved after the phone rang. I sent one text to the lease group. Something is wrong. I heard Dad's phone near his blind, but someone called my name from creek. Call sheriff. Then I put my phone on silent and slid it into my chest pocket. I do not know if anyone understands how helpless a tree stand can feel until you are trapped in one. People think being up high makes you safer. Sometimes it does. But it also gives you only one way down. It makes every movement obvious. You cannot run. You cannot hide. You cannot quietly back out. You are sitting in a metal chair above the ground, attached to a ladder that anyone can watch. I stayed still. A few minutes passed, maybe more. Time got strange. I kept my eyes on the strip of woods below me where the voice had come from. Then I heard Dad's voice again, closer this time. "Come down." That was all it said. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "It's me." Not, "There's someone here. Just come down." I knew then it was a person trying to draw me out. Maybe he had heard Dad say my name before. Maybe he had overheard us at the trucks on another day. Maybe his voice just happened to sound close enough because I wanted it to. I still do not know. I only know it was close enough to freeze me and wrong enough that I did not answer. My phone buzzed once against my chest. I did not look right away. I waited until I could do it without moving much, then tilted it inside my jacket. Brent had written, "Called 911. I'm on my way but staying at road." Kenny wrote, "Stay put." Then another message from Brent. "Sheriff said don't shoot unless threat immediate. They're sending someone." That was good advice, but it also made me understand I was going to be sitting there alone for a while. The lease was 25 minutes from town if deputies were already free, and they probably were not. It was opening morning. Every county road had hunters on it. Every dispatcher was probably fielding calls about shots, trespassing, road hunters, and accidents. I looked toward the trucks again through the gap. The dark shape was gone. Both trucks were still there. At least I thought they were. From that distance, I could not tell if doors were open. I waited. The person below me did not call again for a while. Once I saw movement through the lower brush. Not enough to identify a body, just a shift of brown and black between trunks. I raised my rifle halfway, then lowered it because I could not point it at something I could not see. Dad drilled that into me before I ever fired a gun. You do not shoot at movement. You do not shoot at sound. You do not shoot because you are scared. That rule probably saved a life that morning. Maybe mine. Maybe my dad's. Maybe a deputy's later. I do not know. Around 7:30 I heard a groan. It was low and muffled, and it came from the direction of Dad's blind. I almost climbed down right then. That is the closest I came to making the worst mistake of my life. I had one boot on the first rung. My hand was on the side rail. Every part of me was telling me my dad was hurt, and I needed to go to him. Then I heard the same scrape of a boot below me, closer to the ladder, and I stopped. The groan came again. I put my boot back on the platform and stayed in the stand, hating myself for it. I took my phone out and called 911 myself. I kept my voice as low as I could and told the dispatcher my name, the lease road, the gate location, and that my father might be hurt. I told her someone had moved my stand, and there was a person trying to lure me down using my dad's voice. Saying it out loud made it sound insane. She did not react like it was insane. She asked if I was armed. I said yes. She asked if I could stay where I was. I said I thought so. She asked if I could see the person. I said not clearly. Then she told me deputies were on the way, and to keep the line open if I could. I did not want the phone making noise, so I put it on speaker at the lowest volume and tucked it inside my jacket. I could barely hear her, but I knew she was there. That helped more than I expected. A few minutes later, the person below me moved again. This time, I saw part of him. A shoulder first, then the side of a head behind a beech tree. He was wearing a dark brown jacket and an orange cap. Not much orange, just the cap. His face was turned upward, but a branch blocked enough of it that I could not make out features. He was closer than I thought, maybe 30 yards from the base of the stand. He stood there for a long time. Then he crouched. That scared me more than if he had run. He crouched behind the beech tree and stayed there. He knew I had seen him. He knew he was not my dad. He was not leaving. He was waiting me out. I remember whispering into my jacket, "I can see him." The dispatcher asked where. I told her. Then the man whistled. It was not loud, just 2 short notes, the kind someone might use to call a dog. From far off, near Dad's blind, something shifted in the leaves. My dad groaned again. I realized then that the man was not alone in the way I had thought. Dad was somewhere down there, alive, and the man knew it. He was using that too. Every sound from Dad pulled at me. Every instinct I had said go to him. But the man was between us, or near enough that he could get to me if I climbed down. He had placed my stand facing his cover. He had created the exact situation he wanted. The only thing he had not counted on was me noticing too early. I stayed there for another 15 or 20 minutes. It felt like hours. The man behind the beach moved twice. Once to shift his weight, once to look back over his shoulder toward the blind. I never saw a gun. I saw something in his right hand, but I could not tell what it was. It might have been a knife. It might have been a pair of cutters. It might have been nothing. I was not going to wait for him to show me. Then I heard an engine near the gate. The man heard it too. His head turned. It was faint, but I could tell a vehicle had stopped on the gravel road outside the property. A door shut. Then another. Voices carried in the cold air, too far away to understand. The man did not run at first. He looked up at me again, and for the first time I saw enough of his face to remember it later. Late 40s maybe. Thin cheeks, gray in his beard. Eyes that looked tired and angry at the same time. Not wild, not confused. Just angry that the morning had stopped going his way. He raised one hand and pointed at me. Then he backed into the laurel. I told the dispatcher he was moving. She told me to stay where I was. I heard more engines now, at least two. Then a shout from far away. Then nothing. The next few minutes are messy in my memory because too much happened at once. I saw orange vests moving down the logging road. One was Brent. One was a deputy. Another was Kenny behind them, even though he was supposed to stay back. They were still far off, maybe 200 yards below me. The man in the brown jacket came out of the laurel lower down and cut across the slope, trying to get around them and back toward the creek. I yelled for the first time. I shouted that he was moving downhill. The man looked up, and that was when he ran. The deputy shouted something I could not make out. Brent dropped to one knee, not aiming at the man, just getting low. Kenny moved behind a tree. The man crashed through the brush below me, not graceful, not silent, just forcing his way through. I could hear branches snapping and leaves tearing. He crossed the creek in 2 jumps and went toward the old logging cut that led to the neighboring property. Then my dad groaned again. I yelled for them to find him. The deputy did not chase the man alone. He moved toward Dad's blind with Brent behind him. A second deputy came up from the logging road a minute later and went after the runner with Kenny pointing the direction. I stayed in the stand because the dispatcher told me to, and because my legs felt useless anyway. They found Dad about 50 yards from his blind, down in a shallow washout. He was alive. I could not see him from the stand, but I heard Brent yell that he was breathing. Then I heard my dad make a sound I had never heard from him before, a kind of angry pain that cut through me worse than a scream would have. I asked the dispatcher if I could climb down. She told me to wait until a deputy came to me. I did, but barely. When a third deputy finally reached the base of my stand and told me to come down slow, I nearly fell twice. My legs were shaking so badly the ladder rattled. He took my rifle from me when I got to the ground, not roughly, just safely, and asked if I was hurt. I said no. Then I pushed past the edge of the laurel enough to see where Dad was. He was on his side in the washout with his wrists zip-tied behind him and duct tape hanging loose from one ankle. His orange vest was torn. There was blood in his hair above his ear, and his face looked gray from cold and shock. His rifle was gone. His phone was on the ground a few feet away, buzzing every time I called earlier. He tried to sit up when he saw me, and the deputy told him not to move. Dad looked embarrassed. That was the part that broke me. He was hurt, tied up, and half-conscious in a ditch, and he still looked embarrassed that I had seen him like that. The ambulance could not get down the logging road, so the deputies and Brent helped carry him out using a backboard once EMS arrived. I walked beside them until one of the EMTs told me to give them room. Dad kept asking if I was okay. I kept telling him yes. He did not ask about the deer or the stand or the man. He asked if I was okay every time he came back around. They caught the man about an hour later on the neighboring property. He had gotten tangled in an old cattle fence while trying to cut through a grown-up pasture. He fought one deputy and got bitten by a police dog from the next county. They found Dad's rifle under a cedar pile along the route he ran. They found a pistol in his waistband, a little .22 revolver with 3 rounds in it. They also found Dad's spare keyring in his pocket. That was how he moved the stand. The explanation came out in pieces over the next few weeks, then in court months later. His name was Russell Hager. He had leased a small piece of the same property years before we did, back when the old owner let different people hunt different sections for cash and did not keep track well. Russell had never accepted that he lost access when the land changed hands and the new owner put everything under one lease. According to neighbors, he still came in from the backside sometimes. He poached deer there. He checked old mineral sites. He used a trail camera of his own near the creek. We had probably crossed paths with him without knowing it for 2 seasons. The year before it happened, Dad found a ground blind that did not belong to any of us and tore it down. He did not make a big deal out of it. He assumed it was some teenager or a trespasser from the next farm. He dragged it to the gate and left a note under a rock saying, "Private lease, do not return." The blind was gone the next week. We thought the message got through. It had not. Russell had been watching us after that. Not every day, not like some movie stalker, just enough. Enough to know our trucks. Enough to know Dad and I split up at the same spot. Enough to know where my stand was. He stole Dad's spare keys from his truck during a workday the previous month. Dad kept them in the center console like a lot of people do in rural places where everyone thinks locked gates and familiar roads mean safety. Russell used the stand key, moved my ladder stand a couple of days before opening morning with help from a second man who was never fully identified, and set it in a place where he could watch me from cover. The plan, as far as anyone could tell, was not some clean kidnapping plot. It was dumber and more dangerous than that. Russell wanted to scare us off the lease. He wanted to catch us separated, take our rifles, maybe rough Dad up, maybe force me down and do the same. He had zip ties, duct tape, and a pistol, so I do not care what his lawyer called it. It could have gone worse in a dozen different ways. He got Dad first because Dad was closer to the blind and easier to approach from behind. Dad told me later he heard movement before daylight and thought it was me coming over about the stand. Someone hit him from the side with what he believed was the butt of a handgun. He remembered falling, then waking up with his hands tied. He heard Russell use his name once, which was probably what I heard from my stand. Russell did not sound exactly like him up close, but with 80 yards of dense timber and early morning fog echoing the sound, my brain automatically tried to fill in the blanks with the only person I expected to be out there. Dad had been trying to make noise every time he heard me move or call. The groans were not staged. He was warning me the only way he could. The reason Russell did not shoot anybody, according to the detective, was probably because everything moved too fast once Brent called for help. Russell expected a normal hunting morning. He did not expect me to question the moved stand right away. He did not expect me to text the group. He did not expect Brent to call 911 instead of walking in alone. Most of all, he did not expect Dad's phone to ring from the wrong place and give away that he was lying. Dad had a concussion, 3 cracked ribs, and nerve damage in one wrist from the zip tie being pulled too tight. He healed mostly. His hearing in one ear got worse for a while because of the hit to his head, but that improved. The emotional part took longer, even though he did not call it that. He stopped leaving spare keys in trucks. He stopped hunting alone. He stopped teasing me for checking locks twice. Russell took a plea after the pistol, and the zip ties made it hard for him to sell the story as a property dispute. He went away for assault, kidnapping-related charges, theft of a firearm, and being a felon with a gun. I do not remember the full legal wording, and I do not want to pretend I do. I just know he did not walk out of court that day, and my dad did. That was enough for me. We gave up the lease after that season, even though the landowner apologized and offered to lower the price. It was not his fault, but none of us wanted to be back there. Brent said he would never sit that ridge again. Kenny said the place felt used up. Dad acted like he was fine either way, but I could tell he was relieved when I said I did not want to return. A few months later, I went back one last time with Dad, Brent, and a deputy to take down our stands and cameras. We did it in full daylight. We stayed together. When we got to the tree where my stand used to be, the hickory still had the old scars from the chain. I stood there for a minute, looking at the marks and thinking about how small the difference was between a normal opening morning and the worst day of my life. A stand moved 70 yards, a phone ringing from the wrong hollow, a voice that sounded close enough to trust if I had been just a little more tired, a little more embarrassed, a little more willing to explain things away. We found Russell's camera that day too. It was strapped to a cedar below the laurel, pointed at the ladder stand he had moved. The card was still in it. The deputy took it, but later we learned it had pictures of me climbing into the stand before sunrise that morning. There were also pictures of Dad walking toward his blind earlier, alive and unaware, with Russell following far behind him through the trees. That image is the one I wish I had never heard about. I still hunt, but not the same way. I do not go into a stand anymore without checking the tree, the straps, the ground, and the approach. I do not assume a locked gate means anything. I do not leave keys in vehicles, even hidden. I do not split up without a clear check-in time. If something is wrong, even something that makes me feel stupid for being worried, I leave first and sort it out later. The thing people misunderstand about hunting horror stories is that the woods do not have to be haunted to turn on you. You can know the land. You can do everything the same way for years. You can walk in with your father on a cold, clear morning, carrying coffee and a rifle, and the kind of comfort that comes from routine. And then one detail is different. A stand is not where it belongs. A voice comes from the wrong direction. A phone rings where the person should be.